Welcome to the debate. I want you to imagine you are in a wooden lifeboat just bobbing in the Aegean Sea. Behind you, a massive ocean liner is sinking rapidly, its stern lifting high into the air.
Right. And the ship's colossal bronze propellers are fully exposed.
Exactly. And because the engines are still running, those blades are spinning at full speed, they're creating this massive whirlpool.
It's a terrifying image, really.
It is. You watch in absolute horror as the suction drags your lifeboat directly into the spinning blades, splintering the wood and pulling the people right next to you under. You have seconds to react. You don't know how to swim, but, well, you throw yourself into the water anyway.
And you survive? I mean, a spinning propeller blade strikes your head, fracturing your skull, pulling you under, but you eventually resurface and you survive.
You survive. Yeah, that was November 1916. During the sinking of the hospital ship HMHS Britannic. But here is the catch. If you are the woman who jumped out of that lifeboat, this isn't your first time surviving a catastrophic maritime disaster.
Not by a long shot.
Right. 4 years earlier, you were on the RMS Titanic when it hit an iceberg and sank. And the year before that, you were on the RMS Olympic when it was nearly torn open by a military warship. Today, we are talking about Violet Jessop. If you have ever gone down a Titanic rabbit hole, you might know her by her famous moniker, Miss Unsinkable.
A nickname that sounds, honestly, like a Marvel superhero, and one that we really need to put under the microscope today.
We do, because it brings up a fascinating historical tension, and that is the central question of our debate. Is Violet Jessop truly deserving of this legendary, almost superhuman framing as a woman who miraculously survived 3 unprecedented maritime catastrophes?
Or has the life of an extraordinary working-class woman been hijacked, essentially, and reduced to a misleading myth? Does calling her Miss Unsinkable effectively obscure the grueling realities and the profound labor exploitation she faced just to survive on the North Atlantic?
That is the crux of it. And I take the position that her legendary framing is absolutely earned. Jessop's documented presence and her survival across these 3 specific historical events constitutes a genuinely unique anomaly. The extraordinary nature of her physical and, psychological endurance justifies every bit of the legend.
And I look at this from a very different angle. I argue that the Miss Unsinkable narrative is a modern rhetorical distortion. It relies on historical inaccuracies, most notably the claim that she survived 3 sinkings when she actually only survived 2.
Well, we'll get into the definitions there.
We will. But more importantly, the myth completely erases the vulnerable working-class woman beneath it. She wasn't an adventure seeker with a magical rabbit's foot. She was an impoverished woman forced into brutal, 16 to 17-hour workdays simply to keep her family from starving. I mean, we've traded a fascinating, grounded story of systemic labor endurance for a cheap Hollywood trope.
I hear you on the media gloss. I really do. But I think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Even if we strip away the 20th century myth-making, Violet Jessop's life remains a staggering testament to human resilience.
Sure, she was resilient. But to understand that, we can't just look at the ships. We have to look at her baseline endurance. She was born to Irish immigrants in a dirt floor cabin in the Argentine Pampas. As a child, she contracted a severe respiratory illness, which was historically diagnosed as tuberculosis.
Right. And survival rates for that were incredibly low.
Exactly. The physicians at the British hospital in Buenos Aires told her family she would be dead in a matter of months, but she survived. She then grows up, goes to sea, and is aboard the Olympic during its catastrophic 1911 collision with the HMS Hawke.
Which did not sink, I just want to point out.
We will debate that. She survives the 1912 sinking of the Titanic in the freezing North Atlantic. And then, as we discussed, she survives the rapid mine-induced sinking of the Britannic in 1916. This isn't just media invention. It is a spectacular, repeated defiance of mathematical odds.
Well, her physical survival is undeniably remarkable. Nobody is disputing that she walked away from incredible dangers.
But we have to look at how modern that legendary status actually is.
What do you mean?
The Miss Unsinkable label was not something her peers were calling her in the 1920s. It's a modern media creation that really exploded around 1997. It perfectly coincided with the publication of her edited memoirs and, let's be honest, the massive cultural wave of James Cameron's Titanic film.
Okay, the timing definitely helped her visibility.
But when society discovered her, they needed her to fit a neat, cinematic narrative. And to do that, history had to be bent. First and foremost, she survived 2 sinkings, not 3. The Olympic never sank. By insisting on the 3 shipwrecks narrative, we elevate her to the supernatural talisman.
I don't think it's supernatural. It's just...
But in doing so, we completely erase the reality of her socioeconomic status. We are talking about a woman making a meager wage, forced into a punishing life by extreme financial desperation, not magical luck.
Hold on. Let's look at the Olympic collision, because saying it didn't sink so it doesn't count severely minimizes what actually happened out there on the water. Yes, categorical precision matters, but we cannot let it obscure the sheer trauma of the event.
I'm not saying it wasn't traumatic.
But on September 20, 1911, the Olympic was the largest civilian ocean liner in the world. It's navigating the Solent Strait, and a British cruiser, the HMS Hawke, is running parallel to it. The physics of what happened next are terrifying.
The hydrodynamic suction.
Exactly. The Olympic was so massive and displacing so much water that its giant wing propellers created a massive hydrodynamic suction. It literally sucked the 7,000-ton warship out of its own lane and directly into the side of the Olympic.
And the Hawke wasn't just any ship. It had a reinforced bow specifically designed to ram and sink enemy vessels.
Yes, a military ramming bow crushed into the starboard corner of the largest passenger ship on Earth. The impact twisted one of the Olympic's massive propeller shafts and instantly flooded 2 major watertight compartments. So when people say, well, the Olympic didn't sink, I find that deeply dismissive.
Dismissive how?
Wrecking ball smashes through your floor, taking out the walls and the plumbing. But because the building's core held up and it didn't completely collapse into the street, people tell you, well, you didn't really survive a disaster. She was physically on board a vessel that had its hull ripped open by a warship. That is a shipwreck in every meaningful psychological sense.
The hydrodynamic physics of that collision are absolutely terrifying, and I am not minimizing the sheer panic that must have gripped the crew. But the outcome matters when we are evaluating a historical legend.
But does it negate her experience?
Well, the Olympic did not sink. It didn't even need to be evacuated at sea. It limped back to Southampton under her own power. There wasn't a single casualty on either vessel. No serious injuries. The ship was patched up and went on to serve for decades, even acting as a troop ship during World War I.
That's true. It did survive.
But if you want to know how Violet Jessop herself viewed the Olympic collision, we have a very crucial piece of evidence. In 1934, she wrote a manuscript of her memoirs, titled Neptune's Green Room. She completely omitted the Olympic crash. She didn't write a single word about it.
Well, she was writing under a pseudonym at the time, Constance Ransom, precisely because she was worried about her privacy.
She was worried about her paycheck. Think about it. Why would she leave out such a dramatic event? Because in 1934, she was still an active employee of the shipping lines, openly discussing a major navigational error and structural failure involving the White Star Line's flagship could have gotten her blacklisted.
That's a fair point about the industry at the time.
That omission proves my point entirely. Her reality was dictated by corporate self-censorship and profound job insecurity. She wasn't wearing her survival as a badge of honor to build a Miss Unsinkable brand. She kept her mouth shut because she was terrified of being fired.
That sheer survival instinct, the need to just do her job and keep her head down, is exactly what makes her actions on the Titanic a few months later so fascinating. Because the legend of Violet Jessop isn't just built on the structural failures of ships, it's cemented by the intimate human details of her survival.
You're talking about the lifeboat.
Yes. Let's look at the Titanic. The ship is settling by the bow. The situation is deteriorating, but the third-class passengers are hesitant to get into the lifeboats because they look small and unsafe. Second Officer Charles Lightlayler orders the stewardesses into Lifeboat 16 simply to serve as a visual example.
Right, to show the passengers it was safe.
As the boat is being lowered into the darkness, Sixth Officer James Paul Moody hands Jessop a forgotten baby. She is wearing a cork life belt, and she holds this freezing infant against her chest for 8 hours in the middle of the open Atlantic.
It is an incredibly cinematic image, I'll give you that. A woman holding a forgotten baby while watching the largest ship in the world split in two.
It is, and she carries that child onto the rescue ship, the Carpathia. Once aboard, a woman rushes up, wordlessly snatches the baby out of her arms, and disappears into the crowd. Jessop never knew who the child was.
So the story goes.
But what elevates this from a tragic anecdote to a profound, almost mythic aspect of her life is what happened decades later. In the 1950s, Jessop is retired, living in a small cottage in Great Ashfield. During a thunderstorm, the phone rings.
I know where this is going.
A woman's voice asks, "Are you the Violet Jessop who saved a baby on the Titanic?" Jessop says yes. The caller laughs, says, "I was that baby," and hangs up. That moment points to an enduring, almost supernatural impact on others' lives that goes way beyond mere statistics.
I have to stop you there, because when historians actually went back and checked the official Board of Trade records, that entire narrative completely falls apart.
How so?
Official records and survivor passenger lists are very clear on this. The only infant documented in Lifeboat 16 was Asad Alexander Thomas. He was a 5-month-old Lebanese boy, and the historical record shows that he was not handed to Violet Jessop.
Wait, really?
Really? He was handed to a first-class passenger named Edwina Trout, who later reunited him with his mother on the Carpathia.
Well, memory in traumatic, chaotic situations is notoriously complex. You have 705 survivors, thousands of people perishing, no lights. It is entirely plausible that another infant was placed in that boat unrecorded.
Perhaps. But here is the nail in the coffin for that specific story. Asad Thomas, the baby in that lifeboat, tragically died of pneumonia in 1931. So a phone call in the 1950s from a woman claiming to be the baby is historically impossible.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. John Maxstone Graham, the maritime historian who later edited her memoirs, suggested that the phone call was likely a cruel prank played by local village children who knew her story, or it was a false recollection born of decades of processing trauma.
That is heartbreaking if it was a prank.
It is. But either way, this is exactly how myths are built. We want the neat resolution of the saved baby calling to say thank you. It makes us feel good. So we accept it, and we ignore the messy reality of the archives. It shows how easily the real, complex woman is lost to sensationalized storytelling.
Okay, even if her memory conflated over the decades, which, as a well-documented psychological mechanism for surviving profound trauma, the true nature of her resilience is verifiable, and it borders on the unbelievable. Let's move forward to 1916 and the Britannic, which brings us back to that terrifying opening scenario.
Right. The Aegean Sea.
Jessop is now working as a VAD nurse, a voluntary aid detachment civilian nurse for the British Red Cross. She is stationed on the Britannic, which has been converted into a massive floating hospital when it strikes a mine laid by a German submarine.
And the Britannic sank in just 55 minutes. That is nearly 3 times faster than the Titanic.
It went down incredibly fast.
And it sank that fast largely because the nursing staff, against protocols, had left lower deck portholes open to ventilate the sick wards. When the ship began to tilt, the water just poured straight through those open portholes, completely bypassing the ship's internal watertight bulkheads.
Right. The engineering was compromised by a simple human desire for fresh air, and the evacuation, as a result, was an absolute nightmare. The captain thought he could beach the ship on the nearby island of Kia, so he kept the engines running.
Which was a fatal mistake.
Lifeboats were launched prematurely by panicked crew members while the ship was still moving. And that leads to the massive half-submerged propellers sucking in the lifeboats, mincing the wood and killing 30 people. Jessop is in Lifeboat 2, heading right for those spinning blades.
And as we established, she jumps.
Despite not knowing how to swim, she leaps into the water. She's dragged under the hull, her head striking the keel repeatedly.
She actually credited her thick auburn hair for cushioning the blows, but an x-ray she had taken for recurring headaches years later revealed she had actually suffered a fractured skull.
I mean, the physics of surviving that kind of blunt force trauma in open water are staggering.
And yet, what does she do right before she abandons ship? We have the famous, verifiable anecdote that as the Britannic is going down, she calmly goes back to her cabin. Why? To grab her toothbrush.
The toothbrush.
She later wrote that the thing she missed most after the Titanic sank was her toothbrush, so she wasn't going to make that mistake again. As a giant ship is sinking to the bottom of the Aegean, she tucks a toothbrush into her apron pocket alongside her prayer book. You simply cannot strip the Miss Unsinkable title from someone with that level of ice-cold coolness under pressure.
Look, I absolutely concede her physical and psychological fortitude. Surviving a skull fracture from a giant propeller is remarkable. The toothbrush story is brilliantly human, but we have to fundamentally reframe why she was on those ships in the first place.
Okay, why then?
This wasn't an adventure. She didn't return to sea after the Titanic because she had some unbreakable, heroic spirit that craved the ocean.
She was providing for her family.
She was completely impoverished. Her father had died of surgical complications. Her mother fell too ill to work. Violet actually had to abandon her plans to enter a convent because she had to become the primary breadwinner for her younger siblings.
Right.
She was trapped. So she applies to the shipping companies. And do you know what she had to do just to get hired as a stewardess?
Well, she had to navigate a very strict Edwardian social code.
That is putting it mildly. At 21 years old, she was deemed too young and distracting by the hiring managers. The Edwardian shipping lines only wanted middle-aged, matronly women.
To protect the passengers' morals.
Exactly. So they wouldn't tempt the male crew or the wealthy first-class passengers. Jessop actually had to deliberately dress dowdily, wearing shapeless, oversized clothes and refusing to wear makeup just to bypass this institutional bias.
Wow.
And she was making just £2 a month. To put that in perspective for the era, that barely covered the cost of basic food and a bed on land, which is exactly why she had to live in the ship's bowels.
Down in the glory hole?
Exactly. The glory hole was the actual nautical term for the unventilated, cramped, communal sleeping quarters deep in the lower decks where the victualling crew, the staff feeding and serving the passengers, slept. When pop culture represents her, they reduce her to a passive prop.
Yeah, they usually just show a quick shot of a stewardess in the background.
Think about James Cameron's Titanic, where the shipbuilder Thomas Andrews gently tells a stewardess named Lucy to put on a life belt to set a good example. It's patronizing. It completely ignores the rigid, oppressive domestic servant boundaries she navigated daily.
That definitely glosses over the harsh reality.
Those realities are undeniably grim, but I argue that they actually enhance the legend rather than dismantle it.
How so? By making her a martyr?
The ultimate aha here is that our modern society turned her trauma into a superpower to avoid feeling guilty about the Edwardian class system.
I don't think it's just guilt avoidance.
We call her unsinkable, so we don't have to call her exploited. Returning to sea after surviving the Titanic wasn't a demonstration of supernatural luck. It was raw, working-class necessity. She needed the wages. She had absolutely no other choice.
Well, I see exactly why you emphasize the socioeconomic constraints. Those details add vital depth. But the fact that she endured 16 to 17-hour days, hauling heavy steamer trunks, cleaning brass for demanding millionaires, enduring harassment, and then survived these defining maritime catastrophes makes her endurance even more spectacular.
It makes it tragic, honestly.
Yes, maybe Miss Unsinkable is a catchy 20th century gloss, but Violet Jessop's documented physical presence across the Olympic collision, the Titanic sinking, and the Britannic sinking remains an unparalleled historical feat. She was a devout woman who carried a rosary, read Hebrew protective prayers, and maintained her sharp sense of humor through unimaginable terror.
I'm not denying her humor or her faith.
Peeling back the media gloss doesn't erase her legend. It proves she earned it in blood, sweat, and freezing water.
But peeling back the legend gives us something much more important than a superhero. It gives us a real person. When we stop viewing her as a magical survivor of 3 shipwrecks, remembering again the wrecking ball didn't sink the skyscraper, we gain a rare, articulate window into the struggles of an Edwardian working-class woman.
Her memoirs are definitely invaluable for that.
Right. Her 1934 memoirs aren't valuable because they confirm a myth. They are valuable because they document extreme labor exploitation, gendered workplace restrictions, and the grueling daily grind of the invisible service crew. She persevered for 42 years at sea out of sheer devotion to her family.
She really did.
She was driven by love and obligation, not because she was a supernatural talisman. And to me, that reality is far more impressive and far more deserving of our respect than any myth.
It's a profound tension, without a doubt. Investigating the space between a viral legend and the nuanced historical record allows us to fully appreciate the complex lives behind history's major events. The archives, as we've seen, are messy, but they are incredibly rich if we are willing to look past the headlines and the Hollywood scripts.
They are. The actual lived experience of the people in the lower decks always has more to teach us than the mythology of the people in first class.
We'll leave it to you, the listener, to decide which lens best honors her legacy. Because in the end, it turns out that real flesh and blood is far more enduring and far more fascinating than a tidy myth. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.